The first battle we'll discuss on this channel is the Battle of Myeongnyang, an encounter where the logical outcome was turned on its head. What led to this astonishing result? Let's dive in. To grasp the magnitude of what occurred in the 16th century, we must travel back to a time of intense tensions and expansionist ambitions. In East Asia, regional powers were on the brink of dramatic changes. The continent was teetering on an unstable equilibrium that foreshadowed the tragedy brought by the Japanese invasion of Korea, known as the Imjin War. At the time, three major powers dominated East Asia: China under the Ming dynasty, Japan under the unification efforts of Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and the Kingdom of Joseon in medieval Korea. The situation was fraught with tension. While the Ming focused on holding back Mongol threats in the north, Japan was undergoing a period of internal consolidation after the long civil war known as the Sengoku Jidai, or the Warring States era. In this context, during the final stages of Japan's civil war, a pivotal figure emerged: Toyotomi Hideyoshi. After defeating the last rival clans, Hideyoshi successfully unified Japan in 1590. But unifying Japan wasn't enough for him. His ambitions extended far beyond his country's borders. His ultimate goal was clear: to invade China. To achieve this, Korea became his gateway. The Korean peninsula was to serve as a springboard to reach the vast Chinese empire, and Hideyoshi began planning a massive invasion. On the other side of this equation stood the Kingdom of Joseon, which had enjoyed a period of internal peace after centuries of conflict. However, Joseon was ill-prepared for the scale of the threat it faced. Despite its rich culture, centralized administration, and organized society, Joseon lacked the capacity to fend off a large-scale foreign invasion. The Joseon army, while well-trained, was focused primarily on land-based defense, while its naval fleet was relatively weak and underdeveloped. Enter Yi Sun-sin, a man destined to change history. In the face of this growing threat, he emerged not only as the architect of one of the most improbable victories in naval history, but also as one of the greatest military strategists of all time. Born in 1545, during a period of internal turmoil in Korea, Yi Sun-sin's military career was anything but conventional. In his early years, he faced numerous challenges, including repeated rejections in the official military examinations necessary to secure a position as an officer. The examination system of the Joseon court was notoriously strict and elitist. Despite his clear talents, Yi Sun-sin faced multiple rejections. However, his perseverance and unwavering dedication kept him from giving up. Finally, in 1576, he earned his position as a military officer. From that moment, he began his journey as a commander in various provinces, gradually showcasing his exceptional tactical and leadership skills. In the early years of his career, Yi Sun-sin excelled primarily in naval combat. He not only defended Korea's coast from Japanese pirate raids, but also proved to be an innovator in naval engineering. He designed a revolutionary class of warships, the iconic turtle ship. These armored vessels would become symbols of his fleet's strength and ingenuity. Despite his success, he frequently faced distrust and opposition from the Joseon royal court, which often questioned his tactics and military approach. This led to his demotion and even imprisonment on several occasions. Yet, he never wavered in his sense of duty or his commitment to protecting his homeland. In 1592, when the Japanese invasion began, Yi Sun-sin had been reinstated as a naval commander. He returned to find the Kingdom of Joseon woefully unprepared for the scale of the invasion. It was during this moment of crisis that he would demonstrate his unparalleled tactical brilliance. Faced with a vastly superior Japanese army and an overwhelmingly larger fleet, he devised an entirely different strategy. His victories would hinge not only on the skill of his fleet, but also on his intimate understanding of the terrain, the natural forces of the sea, and his extraordinary ability to adapt to and overcome a far larger enemy force. Yi Sun-sin, a man who had spent much of his life battling not only pirates but also the indifference and short-sightedness of his own court, was now ready to face his greatest challenge. What lay ahead was the Imjin War, a conflict that would forever alter the fate of Korea and establish Yi Sun-sin as one of the greatest naval strategists in history. To fully grasp what happened during the Battle of Myeongnyang, we need to look back at the context in the days leading up to this crucial confrontation. In 1597, the Imjin War, the Japanese invasion of Korea, was at its most critical point. Although Japan had first invaded in 1592, the war had dragged on due to the fierce Korean resistance and Chinese intervention. By this time, Japan was determined to secure its final victory, and Korea desperately needed a leader who could stand up to the formidable Japanese fleet. In the spring of 1597, Japanese leader Toyotomi Hideyoshi had managed to assemble an impressive fleet. 130 ships, several of them large and heavily armed with cannons designed to overpower any enemy fleet in a direct confrontation. This powerful fleet was heading towards the Korean peninsula, where it hoped to crush Korean resistance. However, Korean commander Yi Sun-sin, in command of a considerably smaller fleet, was determined to use cunning to confront one of the most powerful naval forces of his time. Yi Sun-sin was not only dealing with a crushing numerical disadvantage, but also with the distrust of his own court. The Joseon fleet, at that time, consisted of only 13 combat-ready ships, worn down from months of confrontations and logistical problems. Despite being a capable commander, he did not have an entire army at his disposal, nor the full backing of the government. The numerical disadvantage was compounded by the need to maintain the morale of his men, knowing that the Korean fleet was almost on the defensive. But what truly made the difference was the terrain. The Myeongnyang Strait, where the battle would take place, was an extremely dangerous area with strong currents and unpredictable winds. For an expert commander like Yi Sun-sin, this was not a hindrance, but rather a strategic advantage. He knew that the large, heavy Japanese ships would struggle with maneuverability in these waters. The powerful currents, which often dragged ships to one side, could disorient and disrupt the enemy fleet, especially in close-quarters combat. Yi Sun-sin was also aware that surprise and speed would be key to victory. Therefore, he had no intention of confronting the Japanese fleet in open water, where numerical forces would decide the outcome. Instead, he prepared a series of quick maneuvers and surprise attacks. His tactic involved hitting the enemy where it hurt most, using his ships agilely to attack, and then quickly retreat before the Japanese could regroup. Yi Sun-sin also employed tactical and technological innovations. One such innovation was the famous turtle ship or armored warship. This warship, with its armored hull and iron-spiked deck, was designed to withstand cannon attacks and enemy charges. He used these ships strategically to attack the flanks of the Japanese fleet and protect his more vulnerable ships. In fact, the turtle ships would play a crucial role in the battle, allowing Yi to penetrate Japanese lines without being easily defeated. On the other hand, Japanese commander Kurushima Michifusa, commanding the fleet, was fully confident in his numerical superiority. Despite previous victories by Yi Sun-sin, he did not underestimate the power of the Japanese fleet. Michifusa expected the battle to be a direct confrontation in which, with over 130 ships, victory was almost guaranteed. Unlike Yi, who used the strategy of attrition, Michifusa anticipated a battle in which he could prevail through the sheer weight of his armada. In the days leading up to the battle, Yi Sun-sin's strategy was clear: to use the terrain to his advantage and strike the enemy unexpectedly, avoiding direct confrontation where the numerical disadvantage of his fleet would be decisive. For Yi, the key was not the quantity of ships, but rather the skill to maneuver, technological innovation, and his deep knowledge of the sea, which would enable him to break the enemy's formation. On the other hand, the Japanese strategy relied on brute force and the power of their fleet. However, Yi Sun-sin had in mind a quick, decisive assault, which depended not only on the capabilities of his ships, but also on great adaptability and psychological manipulation, hoping that the fatigue and disorganization of the Japanese fleet could work to his advantage. With the forces facing off in a challenging natural environment and Korea's fate hanging in the balance, Yi Sun-sin knew that victory would not come easily. But he was convinced that by using his tactical ingenuity and knowledge of the sea, he could achieve the unthinkable. It was only a matter of time before the waters of the Myeongnyang Strait would become the stage for one of the most impressive victories in military history, a victory that would shape the destiny of the entire Korean peninsula. The Battle of Myeongnyang serves as a shining example of naval strategy. We will now break down each phase of the battle, focusing on the tactics, maneuvers, and key decisions made by Yi Sun-sin. This battle is famous not only for Yi's tactical superiority, but also for how he managed to defeat a much larger Japanese fleet. The information is organized into phases for easier understanding. Before the battle, Yi Sun-sin faced a much larger Japanese fleet, approximately 133 Japanese ships versus the 13 Korean ships available. The situation was particularly challenging. The Korean fleet had suffered numerous defeats, the Korean court's distrust had weakened Yi's position, and he did not have the full backing of the government. However, Yi Sun-sin relied on two key elements for the battle: deep knowledge of the terrain. The Myeongnyang Strait has strong currents and turbulent waters, which made maneuvering difficult for large, heavy Japanese ships. He knew he could use this to his advantage. Technological innovations and superior maneuverability. The Korean fleet, although small, was equipped with turtle ships, designed to withstand direct attacks and provide a solid front in combat. He placed his ships in a strategically defensive position in the Myeongnyang Strait, a place where the currents could be used to disrupt the Japanese fleet. The Korean fleet deployed in a dispersed battle line to take advantage of its maneuverability, avoiding a tight formation like the Japanese. The Japanese ships entered the Myeongnyang Strait without fully understanding the challenges of the terrain. When the Japanese fleet, commanded by Kurushima Michifusa, entered the Myeongnyang Strait, it immediately faced the unpredictable currents of the area. Despite their numerical superiority and their large warships, the Japanese were unaware of the currents that could drag their ships into dangerous places. Yi Sun-sin used his expert knowledge of the terrain. He knew that the marine currents in the Myeongnyang Strait were very strong, which disoriented the Japanese ships and forced them to maneuver without order, disrupting their formation. The smaller and lighter Korean ships began attacking in quick bursts, firing arrows, cannons, and using their turtle ships to strike at the Japanese flanks. The Korean fleet began to apply their rapid maneuvers, hitting the Japanese at their weakest points. Yi Sun-sin, with a much smaller and less numerous fleet, knew he couldn't afford a direct confrontation. Therefore, he employed attritional tactics, using his ships to attack unexpectedly and quickly withdraw before the Japanese could respond. He arranged his fleet to strike at the Japanese flanks with the turtle ships at the front. These armored ships could withstand direct fire and ram enemy ships, destabilizing Japanese formations. The Korean fleet moved rapidly among the islands and rocks of the strait, using the geography to their advantage. The lighter Korean ships could move quickly and appear suddenly on the flanks of the Japanese fleet before withdrawing again to regroup. The combination of surprise attacks and the disorganization caused by the currents caused the Japanese fleet to quickly lose control. The Japanese ships could not maintain a solid formation and began to scatter, allowing Yi to concentrate his attacks on isolated groups of ships. As the battle continued, the Japanese ships began to crumble morally. Yi's tactic of rapid attack and withdrawal was highly effective. The Japanese, accustomed to direct confrontations and relying on their numerical superiority, didn't know how to respond to a war of movement and attrition. Realizing the confusion in the enemy's ranks, he decided to intensify his attacks, taking advantage of the lack of cohesion and the exhaustion of the Japanese forces. Additionally, the marine currents and the nearby islands made it difficult for the Japanese fleet to maneuver. He organized his ships to perform quick attacks on small groups of remaining enemy ships that were isolated from the main formation. Defeats in small skirmishes, combined with the chaos caused by the Korean maneuvers, began to break the morale of the Japanese. Many of the Japanese ships began to retreat in disarray, which allowed Yi to concentrate his forces on those still resisting. Towards the end of the battle, the Japanese fleet, which had arrived with great expectations and numerical superiority, found itself completely disorganized. The Japanese ships, which had previously been noted for their cohesion and discipline, were overwhelmed by Yi's rapid tactics and his knowledge of the terrain. Seeing that the Japanese fleet was already defeated, Yi Sun-sin organized his ships to ruthlessly attack the disordered vessels, taking advantage of the psychological and tactical victory. The Japanese, seeing themselves surrounded and overwhelmed, began to flee in disarray. The morale of the Japanese troops plummeted, and the Japanese fleet retreated in disarray, without the capacity to reorganize for a new confrontation. The Battle of Myeongnyang, 1597, had a profound and multifaceted impact on both the course of the Imjin War and on Yi Sun-sin's personal legacy. This victory not only altered the course of the war, but also elevated Yi to the status of a legendary figure in military history, whose achievements are still admired today. Below, I outline the impact of the battle on two key areas: the context of the Imjin War and Yi Sun-sin's legacy. Before the Battle of Myeongnyang, the situation for Korea was extremely grave. After the initial Japanese invasion in 1592, the Japanese had advanced across the peninsula, and Korean resistance was on the brink of collapse. However, Yi Sun-sin's resistance in the Korean waters was one of the keys to halting the Japanese advance. The victory at Myeongnyang shattered the Japanese fleet's morale and forced Toyotomi Hideyoshi to reconsider his strategy. Although the war did not end at that moment, the defeat at Myeongnyang resulted in a significant loss of resources and men for the Japanese. This greatly weakened Japan's ability to continue its invasive efforts effectively. The naval defeat at Myeongnyang also disrupted the Japanese fleet's ability to supply its troops in Korea. The Japanese ships, which depended on sea routes to send provisions and reinforcements, were severely affected. Yi Sun-sin, by controlling the strait and the coasts, cut off their supply lines, causing a logistical collapse on the battlefield. The victory of Yi Sun-sin had a devastating psychological impact on the Japanese, but an extraordinary one for the Koreans. After the defeat in 1592 and a series of bad news, this victory gave them immense confidence in their ability to resist. Korean morale was almost instantly restored, allowing the Korean ground forces to resume the offensive in some areas and conduct attritional attacks in key locations. Although China's intervention had already begun before the battle, the naval victory at Myeongnyang facilitated continued Ming support, including the arrival of additional ground troops. Yi Sun-sin not only saved Korea at sea, but also allowed for a more effective reinforcement of the Korean front on land, as the Japanese were unable to contain these dual threats. Before the Battle of Myeongnyang, the Joseon dynasty was in a desperate situation. The Japanese invasion had weakened the country and put its existence as an independent state in jeopardy. However, Yi Sun-sin's victory provided a crucial gap of hope for resistance. This victory allowed the Joseon government to maintain control over the peninsula, albeit with great sacrifices. The impact of the Battle of Myeongnyang was fundamental to Yi Sun-sin's rise as Korea's great national hero. While he was already a respected commander before the battle, the victory at Myeongnyang solidified his legendary status. Despite being in an extremely disadvantageous military and political position, he showed tactical mastery that elevated him above his contemporaries. Yi Sun-sin's feat of achieving a decisive victory with just 13 ships against over 130 Japanese has become one of the most notable achievements in military history. His ability to read the terrain, his innovative tactics, and his desire to protect his country have made him a symbol of resistance and dedication. From this victory, Yi Sun-sin was elevated to the status of a legend within Korea. His figure became a symbol of national unity, and his story is told as an example of courage, ingenuity, and loyalty. His unwavering loyalty to his country and dedication to duty transformed him into a popular hero, with monuments and statues erected in his honor, especially in places like Seoul and the port of Hanseong. The victory at Myeongnyang also had a significant impact on Korea's naval militarization and the study of naval strategies in the future. The rapid and attritional warfare strategy employed by Yi during the battle set a precedent for future asymmetric naval warfare tactics. The turtle ships played a crucial role in the confrontation and demonstrated the importance of technological innovation in naval warfare. Yi Sun-sin not only won on the physical battlefield, but also in the psychological one. His tactic of wearing down the enemy and keeping his fleet at a safe distance while launching quick attacks left a deep lesson on how to use fear and uncertainty to win battles without the need for constant frontal combat. Yi's victory not only had an immediate impact, but left deep lessons for Korea's future history. Yi Sun-sin showed that a capable leader can change the course of a war, even under almost impossible circumstances. His ability to unite his people, motivate his men, and make strategic decisions at critical moments became a reference for future generations. He also taught the importance of knowing the terrain, understanding enemy movements, and adapting to changing circumstances on the battlefield. His adaptability and exploitation of available resources, such as the strong currents of the Myeongnyang Strait, were decisive for the victory. Although Yi Sun-sin is primarily a hero of Korea, his story has transcended borders and been internationally recognized. His military tactics and principles, especially regarding naval warfare, have been studied by militaries around the world, including modern naval strategists. And that concludes the analysis of the Battle of Myeongnyang. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think of this incredible victory of Yi Sun-sin? What other historical battles would you like us to analyze on the channel? I'd love to know what topics interest you most to continue exploring military history together. Don't forget to leave your comments below, give the video a thumbs up if you liked it, and subscribe if you haven't already. In the next video, we'll delve into more epic battles and strategies that changed the course of history, so don't miss it. See you in the next video. Until then, warriors of history.